You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
It's no secret that great team members are the reason behind the success of the Disney experience. Everyone wants to have that Disney experience, and everybody wants to train their people to have that Disney experience. We are lucky today because we are going to talk about the Disney experience from someone who is a former head of training at Disney and a NACS Show speaker. Today, our guest is Doug Lipp. He is a general session speaker at the NACS Show. He is also a consultant talking about training and former head of training at Disney, as I mentioned earlier. So thanks for joining us today, Doug.
Jeff, it's an honor, and I'm so looking forward to the NACS Show coming up in just a couple of weeks.
So our theme all 4 days of the general sessions is around customer experience, and it's not in isolation. When you look at everyone today, the buzzword that you hear is customer experience, and customer experience goes back to at the heart of your career in just setting up everything around customer experience. And I want to start at the beginning. Disney wasn't really known for customer experience. It was known for a movie studio that put out exceptional movies, which were about experience. But then they went into theme parks, which was all about experience. So can you kind of take us through your journey at Disney and Disney's journey in figuring out that customer experience was at the core of repeat customers?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Jeff, and it goes back to Walt Disney himself. Yes, he started the studios, but he also would take his daughters to kiddie lands and those kinds of state fairs or whatever. And one of the things that impressed Walt in a negative way was how unkempt these places were. They were filthy, and it seems like the staff there was indifferent and dust. So one of the things that Walt learned from that experience with his daughters was that I'm going to create a place that puts safety and courtesy, cleanliness and friendliness at the top of the list. So that really was the impetus for creating Disney, the theme park, not just another kiddie land.
And of course, now you go to Times Square, and I can imagine that that's a similar with the unkempt characters that are unauthorized from all kinds of various properties that are wandering around, in need of a bath, and also a buck or two. So you can see the difference between that.
I love that. Nothing like seeing Mickey walking around Times Square with his head off smoking a cigarette. I love that show.
So experience is about getting everybody to understand the customer journey. And I think really that when a lot of people talk about training, they may use the phrase, I have to go train people. But when you go in with the concept, I have to train people, it's a chore. And I would imagine that to train properly, you look at it as an opportunity, and that's a whole different shift that puts you in a different mindset to set up a better training program.
Well, your point exactly, and it's not just the trainers. Trainers are saying, I got to go train, and trainees are saying, I got to go to training. This is a waste of time. And oftentimes it is. And the reason for that, Jeff, is that most organizations treat training as a vaccination, one-stop shopping. If you go to training, you'll be fixed. And really what training is, especially in the Disney mindset and other organizations that really nail it, is it's part of a very robust organizational culture. And it can be an organization of 10 people or tens of thousands. So training really should be an extension of the values, the vision, the mission that everybody is walking and believing, as opposed to, I go to training, I hear the corporate speech, and then I go into the field and I see just the opposite. So that further reinforces the waste of time of many training programs.
And it's not just checking something because you're supposed to check it off and here's the book. And when you get a chance, go through it and look at it over and over again. It's much deeper than that. And you have been training has been at the heart of what you do your entire career. You were head of training at Disney. You were part of their operations that led ultimately to the opening of the Tokyo Disney property. And you've written a whole bunch of books, including Disney U. You give presentations that focus on the importance of training without giving away what you'll be talking about at the NACS Show. What is your goal when you speak to people that you want to change their mindset or make them think differently so when they leave, they're better able to deliver customer experience?
Well, it's to be honest about what it takes to create that engaging training program. And my mentor, Van France, was the man who started the Disney University back in the mid-1950s. Disneyland opened, and Van was a trainer there, and he realized it needed to be more extensive. So he built a team of people who kind of codified the Disney University as we know it today in the early 60s. And I was blessed to have several of those people who were on the startup team for Disney University be my mentors. I never got to meet Walt. He passed away before I joined the company, but my mentors were just like Walt in that they were tough as nails, fair as can be, and visionaries. So the concept that I bring to any keynote or workshop or executive retreat is, what are the components of helping training stick? And really what it boils down to is you want to impart knowledge. You want to help change behavior because training really is behavior change. Education is knowledge. That's fine. Read a book, you've got more knowledge. But training should actually result in new and better behaviors or reduction of dysfunctional behaviors. And what always gets in the way of changing actions, transferring the knowledge to the action, there's always a central filter called emotion, buy-in. In technical talk, it's the BS filter. So I'm the trainee, I'm listening, but I just don't see it coming to life in the real world. So I'll sit here and nod my head. I'll get the boxes checked, but it never appears when I go back into the workforce. So it doesn't matter how bright and shiny all of the PowerPoint slides are in a corporate training environment. Doesn't matter how skilled the presenters are. If the affective filter, the emotional filter of the attendees is basically saying, yeah, sounds great, but I don't see the boss doing it. Yeah, sounds great, but when's the last time I saw my colleagues doing it? I don't know if I buy in. And that's what I try to share is that, yes, Disney is an iconic brand, but it's not about Mickey or Donald or Buzz Lightyear or the iconic characters. It's about doing the basics every single day, and those basics are available to all of us.
And trying to stay away from the yeah buts, because if somebody's what you want to do, I would imagine, is you create the narrative so that when somebody is an exception to what is expected as training, it's seen as an exception, not a bypass or a hall pass for somebody to do behavior that is not in line with what's expected of everybody else.
Sure. And also it gets back to basics of what really constitutes training. And that's kind of a relative term. And sometimes it's really important to get to the basics because I've seen really effective training just in mentoring, one-to-one. It could be on-the-job training, OJT. Doesn't have to be in a high-tech classroom or distance learning or any of those things with gamification. Yes, those are all fun, but it doesn't have to limit your thought process as a trainer, as a business owner of how do I get my people more engaged in XYZ? And then you think of creative ways based on your budget, your staff, your time constraints, etc. How do we convey this information in a new, engaging way to get people to buy in and change?
The idea of long-term training, I think, is super important too, because a lot of times I've been at NACS 25 years, and it's like, how come? I'm not saying this is hypothetical. How come fill in the blank doesn't have the same enthusiasm I have? And it's like, well, it's a journey. And I remember a great lesson my previous boss here had in her dad was in our industry and talked to a reporter one day for 15 minutes. And the next day, the reporter didn't get everything exactly right. And she said, well, how long you been in the industry, Dad? 40 years. How long has a reporter understood your industry? 15 minutes. And it's like, okay, there's an opportunity there to have regular conversations with this person so that when it's not, I only have time for a 15-minute interview, there's a little bit more communication. And that's the way best practices around customer experience, around training. It is that continuous, not just once a year we have this trainer come in, but it's like, hey, I'm working on something. And when you're working on something, you're also building out your passion. And it's a real good opportunity to have that mentor, to have that trainer, to build in the passion.
Yeah, and most definitely it's a continuum. It's not just a one-stop, go to training and you're done. It's daily, it's hourly, it's that repetition, as you said, Jeff. It's in staff meetings, it's in pre-shift huddles, post-shift huddles, where you might have role plays, just 5 minutes of role plays where you say, okay, here's the challenging customer of the week that we had last week, and everybody gets to rotate. Yeah, as a staff member, yeah, here's the challenge that I had, and here's how I handled it, whether it was face-to-face, whether it was over the phone, over the internet, doesn't matter. And if you keep that front of mind in your staff, then when the actual real-time challenging customer comes to play, it's kind of paradoxical, but it's kind of fun because, gosh, I've played this over and over again in staff meetings, and now I'm prepared. Let's roll with it.
So, like I said, I don't want to necessarily talk about things that you'll be talking about on stage because it's way more exciting to hear you on stage and see and all those things, the interaction that we have. But I do want to mention to folks that Doug isn't just a speaker. Doug is someone whose family has a connection to our industry. And I thought that was super cool in learning a little bit more about you. Your family has experience with oil production and this company called BAPCO. Do you want to give us a little of that backstory?
Wow, now we're going really deep and long time ago, Jeff. Yeah, BAPCO is the Bahrain Petroleum Company, and my grandfather started the first refinery in the Middle East in Bahrain in 1937. He met the king of Saudi Arabia. He was over there for many years, on and off, until 1960 when he retired. My father spent several years over there as a young lad, 8 years of age to 11 years of age. So it's an interesting story in that, getting back to the training, I uncovered in research for BAPCO, and my wife and I have had many trips to Bahrain to donate family heirlooms to the kingdom and to the corporation. But I uncovered a really interesting quote from my grandfather, and to paraphrase it, it was, "We in executive leadership, which at the time was 100% expatriates, non-Bahrainis, we owe it to the locals to train them to take over our jobs because it's the locals who know best, ultimately, if they're well trained." So I kind of feel like the training gene is well embedded in my DNA.
And oil production and convenience stores sell 80% of the gas in the country. So there's obviously a nice synergy that we can explore on the general session stage. I'm going to just ask you one industry question, and then we'll kind of wrap things up.
Sure.
Now, thinking about, everybody's been to convenience stores. So everybody has a general sense of what retail's like. If costs were no concern and you were creating a store, how would you design it around people and in experience? Not necessarily the products, but design doesn't have to be physical store layout, but cost being no concern, how does that store operate?
Yeah, I think that really goes to what I learned from Marty Sklar, and I will touch upon this in my presentation, but I'm not sharing any secrets right now. But Marty was all about working with Walt, and when Walt would come up with really wild ideas, the idea was to run with it and play with it as opposed to shutting it down. So just like improvisational theater where people say yes and let's build upon that, Marty's approach with Walt was yes, if. Yes, Walt, we can do that. If, let's consider this. So it was more optimistic than pessimistic, glass half full. So glass half full to your question, Jeff, is I would consider not a convenience store, but a convenience spa. What does this place look and feel like if we really took care of the actual needs of our employees and our customers? Actual needs meaning, gosh, are there plenty of products here that they really need to make it a convenience store? Is it frictionless, or are there a lot of barriers one way or the other for me as a customer or an employee to interact with each other? I think that you could spend a lot of money if you didn't have a budget on gathering from your client base and your employee base the reaction to, if this were a convenient spa, what would it look like? What would it feel like? What would it smell like? What would the experience be? Is it covered parking? Forget about being public parking space. Is it covered parking? If you're in a winter environment, do you have plug-ins so your car doesn't freeze over? Whatever the case might be. But open up your creative juices and let them flow. I would also argue that it's not about cost. So one of the things that Walt Disney and Van France, my mentor, Jim Cora, another guy, is, yeah, they had a pretty good budget, but Walt was incessant that cast members greet each other, smile backstage, so that when you go in front of customers and guests, you are smiling and friendly. So oftentimes what I will say to my clients who complain that they have no budget is, well, really, how expensive is a smile? And are you greeting people upon entry and upon leaving, or actually saying, gosh, I'd like to help you. You look like you're wondering where to go in the aisle here. Well, can I guide you somewhere? So that real personal connection, which I would suggest is more important now than ever before due to the post-COVID mindset. And what I see with my clients around the world is their customers, their clients really appreciate empathy. They appreciate somebody reaching out and helping them, because so many of us had tragedies during COVID and had to put up with so much stuff about pipeline is full or pipeline is shut down or whatever the case might be. We just can't get products. So being human, I think, is a huge part of having that convenience spa.
So I was looking through our records and the different types of general session speakers we've had over the years. And we did have another person from Disney who spoke about training back in the day, named Mike Vance.
Mike Vance, know him well, great guy.
And he spoke at a couple of NACS shows, and that was just talking about the importance of training, and he was well received and came back. So that tells you about how thirsty our audience is to learn about the Disney experience, and we're really looking forward to this. So couple things as we conclude. You are the author of 8 books, and Disney U is the one that's most relevant to our discussion on stage. But you're also, most people are going to the NACS Show or traveling, and there's one book that you may want to seek out in advance of traveling, because we all had this experience. The title of Doug's book is Stuck in the Middle Seat. So I hope not many of you are stuck in the middle seat, but tell us about that book in particular, and why that book might matter to our audience.
Well, Jeff, in my work, I'm on the road a lot, as you can imagine, and I was in a place where I was getting tired of always having to get in a hotel room where it was noisy, or the workout room wasn't what they promised it would be, or going through TSA was time consuming, and then getting on the plane, it's like, oh my gosh. So I found myself complaining more about appreciating what I had. I created this empire. I can look in the mirror and say, there's the boss who you can complain to. So to answer your question, I wrote this book about being a road warrior, and the subtitle is Why Traveling Can Really Suck. And it was a way to energize myself and to flip the narrative. So instead of getting upset when something didn't go according to what I thought should be, I started to gather ideas about travel challenges, and I hired a cartoonist from Mad Magazine. Some of the older folks in the audience will remember that magazine. And I would send him sketches of situations that were comical or frustrating. But what it did for me, Jeff, was it gave me a break from complaining. It was like, oh, another bad experience. How lovely. This is going to be so fun. So it was really a mindset of, gosh, I'm really in control. And metaphorically, when we are in the middle seat, not literally on that airplane, but metaphorically, when we're stuck in a hard place, we can control our attitude and nothing else. And the process of writing and producing this book over about 18 months really reinforced that in my mind. So to this day, when I find myself moaning and groaning about something, it's like, wait a minute, what are you adding to this narrative right now that's negative? Take a step back, take a breath, and maybe redirect. So that's really what the book is all about, is redirecting.
And Mad Magazine, for those who aren't familiar with it, sorry, it's an amazing magazine. It was great content, and the artists were unbelievable. So for those of you heading to the NACS Show and you want something to read on the plane, Doug has 8 books for you to pick from. You can find any of them to bring with you. He is speaking at the NACS Show October 8th in the general session, and he is going to inspire us talking about customer experience. So thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you on stage at the NACS Show.
Great, Jeff. Thanks so much for your time, and I look forward to seeing everybody in Las Vegas.
And thank you all for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.